What is up, YouTube and Twitter? I have a very exciting guest. He does incredible work on X. I'm going to link all of his stuff. It is Byron Bader. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about rankings. I know you just dropped your rankings, and you had somebody that I think surprised a lot of people at the top. You had Anton Frondell. Can you tell me a little bit about him and what you see in his game that, analytically as well as just eye test puts him at the number one spot?
Yeah, so I mean the way my rankings work is it's more of a analytical based like predictive model looking at essentially scoring across every league and then sort of normalizing everything and then factoring in age and size and all this type of stuff and going back. So the model goes back to 1990 and then it's basically looking at, when you normalize everything and put everybody on the same level playing field and you look at sort of the production development that they're making and then looking at all the similar players that sort of did a similar thing. That's essentially what it's doing. So when you build a model like that and then you look at like the rankings each year like this, like Frondell just sort of bubbles to the top for many reasons. So one, he's pretty young. So he's born in May, which is, he's not one of these guys that's born in like October, November of the previous year. So age is a massive thing with this. Like 6 months can be a world of difference. Numbers could be all the same, but then, if there's that big age gap, then that can be a huge boost. So that's one part. You look at where he was in his pre-draft year, so he had an equivalency, I call it, in the 20s for a younger kid is really good. And then this year playing in the secondary league in Sweden, which is I find like very, very underrated. Like people, oh, you're playing in like the relegation league, but it's actually like really good. I mean, obviously it's not as good as the SHL, but it's pretty comparable when you look at a production-based model like this. Like it's pretty comparable to a league like the Liga League. So I mean, he performed really well in there, and he had a equivalency in the 40s, which when you look at younger players that sort of have that 20 and 40 mix, they tend to work out really well anyways. Like Kucherov looked like this, Mark Savard looked like this, going way back. Quentin Byfield looked the exact same, Mitch Marner. Very few guys where it's like, oh, that guy never mounted to anything. Like they basically at least make the NHL, and then 4 out of 5 times they turn into a star in the NHL. So that's what Frondell looks like. But then he has this actually extra boost from doing this in a pro Euro league. That's pretty rare to do. Normally, it's coming from even a juniors league in Europe or a junior league, obviously in Canada, or like the U.S. development program or maybe the college ranks. But like it's pretty rare to do it in a Euro league like that, especially as a young guy. So when you look at a player who kind of compares exactly like him, and there's only one, and it's Barkov. He's the only one who
Yeah.
ever looked like that. And, he worked out pretty well. So that's kind of all that added in. And then when you look at it like from a, eye test thing, like he's a big guy, he's got a great shot. He's already physically mature. He can kind of play center or wing, whether he sticks at center. I mean, maybe like it depends if he develops there, but like he's not a little tiny guy that like you're like, oh yeah, for sure this guy's getting moved over to the wing like as soon as he makes the NHL. So all that kind of adding up is sort of where he bubbles up to the top of my list in this this model that I have and how I build the rankings.
Well, you do a great job over there, and man, that fires me up as a Blackhawks fan. Obviously, we were talking before we got on about me being a Blackhawks fan, and obviously he's the favorite right now at one minus 140 or 160. And do you mind if I actually share your rankings on the screen via the Zoom?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I did pull them up just in case you said yes. And this is the beautiful rankings that he just posted. I mean, it is some incredible work. Can I ask you first about the model? And I know you said Barkov, which, like I said, was his player comp, but how does this model work? So, like, you put a player through, you. So what I'm asking is because he played in the SHL in some of the games and he played into the second league there, is there kind of a different scoring for if you play in the NCAA, OHL, WHL, or SHL?
Yeah, so absolutely. So a lot of these Europe guys, they play, they can play in two, three, sometimes four leagues. So I basically, so long as there's a decent sample set of where they played, so basically like at least 10 games, but you want to see essentially 20 or more, but I'll kind of take 10 as a baseline. So if they played in multiple leagues, I'll take wherever they showed best, and I kind of use that universally throughout the model. So it's always apples to apples, and I'm not like choosing this one over here and then I'm going to choose this league over here. Like it's always the same methodology, so it's always the same. Yeah, and in terms of leagues, like that's the big thing with the model in terms of like normalizing the production is each league is very different in terms of how the production relates in one league to when they make to the NHL. So basically what the score, it's called an equivalency. And this is not something I created. This has existed for like, I don't know, maybe 2 decades now, maybe more than that. And it's essentially looking at the player playing in a certain league and then they make the jump to the NHL and it looks at the sort of average of what they do in each league and then that's where you come up with your translation. So every league is different from itself like and then in my model I'm basically only looking at younger players. That's where it sort of differs from the traditional equivalency. But like you look at the SHL and you look at the KHL, traditionally like they've been pretty close to on par with the NHL, a little bit less. Like a point in the SHL is worth like 80% of a point in the NHL. Whereas if you look at like the junior levels, like in Canada, so the OHL and the WHL, like a point there is worth like 3 points in the OHL is worth like 1 point in the NHL. And then college is, that's like a 0.44 translation. So there's these, there's probably 50 different leagues that a player can come from. Most of the time they probably come from about 20, but each league is quite different from itself. So then it's basically taking all that math in the background and then it's applying these translation to it and it basically shoots out a number. And I call it these thresholds. So you're looking to see, what production jumps they're sort of making every year. And then when you break it down and you look at players and then you can kind of in a way, take the league out of it. And you can say, okay, a player that does this sort of progression and they're younger, they're born sort of in the spring or the summer, they tend to do X. Whereas a player that has a different progression that is an older player, like born in October, November, January, February, that type of thing, they have this progression. They tend to end up like this. And then it's basically comparing this to the 8,000 players drafted over the last 35 years and that's how it's sort of breaking down these probabilities in the model of being a star in the NHL or just making the NHL in general and then also the comparables so that here's everybody that looked like player X at the draft based on this model and then here's I follow the player along for 3 years post draft so then it's kind of like they get a final comparison at the end that says after this sort of 5 year track, these are all the players that sort of look exactly like how this player sort of progressed production wise. So it basically helps normalize everything so you can look at everything on the same level playing field. These hundreds of prospects that are getting drafted or eligible to get drafted every year. It's putting them all on the same level so you can kind of view them all from the same lens essentially.
So like with the NCAA kind of grabbing more of the talent from the CHL is with the NIL, and you're seeing a lot of players like Jackson Smith, maybe Gavin McKenna, Michael Misa, if he doesn't make the NHL. I mean, there's a ton of talent going over to the NCAA. Is that going to kind of change the model? Does it change by the points yearly because of how good that league is and might weaken some of the other leagues?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way the model works is essentially like I'm kind of looking at like over decades. And there is other people that are sort of looking at it in a bit of a different way, like on a year-to-year basis, and they're kind of showing, the dips in the leagues. I'm looking at it a bit differently, but it takes kind of like I'm kind of looking at it in eras, I guess. So I have like the 90s and then the 2000s, 2010s. So it's kind of like I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen into the future. I kind of have to like wait for it to happen, but certainly I think that could be the case. You have, especially if you have a lot of these some of the best ones, some of the high flyers, the ones that produce a ton for their team, going to the NCAA, which is about 50% better in terms of production gap between, the WHL and the OHL versus NCAA. And then, yeah, kind of weakening that talent base in the CHL basically, and then increasing in the NCAA. So it'll take a couple of years to sort of filter through with the way I look at it, but I could certainly see that happening for sure.
Was there a player in your model that you kind of were surprised that they graded out so well?
This year especially.
Yeah.
I mean, Frondell bubbling right to the top is a little bit of a surprise. Like most consensus rankings probably have him more in that kind of 5 to 7 hole. So I mean, he bubbled right to the top right away. Like I think his star probability right now is 89%, which is gigantic for, a draft year player. So that was certainly a bit of a surprise that I just couldn't take him out of that first slot because he was just ranked so high and everything. Um, yeah, so a guy like Jake O'Brien kind of like bubbles a little bit higher than a lot of rankings. Like I have him at fifth. He probably doesn't go till maybe that ninth or tenth spot. And like he's kind of just a step below Frondell. Like he's really, really young. He has really good numbers in his pre-draft year and his draft year, not quite as high as Frondell. But like you look at those players, and 40-50% of them turn into stars. They almost always make the NHL. So there's guys like that that are kind of bubbling up there. Guys like Kindle and Reshny look very similar to O'Brien. The consensus probably has them kind of going maybe in the late teens into the 20s. Maybe one of them slips to the second round. I have them kind of in the ninth, 10th hole, and they basically look very similar to guys like O'Brien and Desnoyers, but they're smaller. So those are the ones where you tend to get a little bit more busts if they're smaller, but they still make the NHL in large form. And yeah, so there is guys that sort of bubble to the top more with me than you see in the rankings. But this year, there's actually like a lot of um, consensus, I guess, between those consensus rankings and then as well as my model. I mean, I have guys a little bit higher, but sometimes I have guys that are, way higher and then I have guys that I'm really low on, but this one's a little bit closer, but there's always that sort of variety from year to year.
Well, like Jake O'Brien at five, actually, I'm hearing like he's almost a lock to go six. So, and obviously Frondell's probably kind of very closer to the third spot, Schaeffer one, two. So, honestly, your draft rankings, which is interesting because it is, based off the model, is more so what that could happen in the draft more than what we're thinking consensus. A name that popped out to me was Roger McQueen. Obviously, there's question marks with the back, but there's also question marks with some of the play and translatability. For your model, do injuries play a part as well as just like why do you think McQueen would be near that 18 overall spot?
Yeah, so they don't play a part like directly where I'm kind of like flagging like this guy was injured type thing, but you can just kind of see it in the data. Often when a guy is injured, he has sort of a setback season in his draft year, especially or his D+1. So, and if you're not making those big jumps, then you look back at the data and then you can see that when they don't do that type of thing, then the future prospect isn't quite as rosy. So when you look at a guy like Roger McQueen, he had a pretty nice pre-draft year. He had an equivalency in the 20s or so. And then in his draft year, where you mentioned he was kind of injured and whatnot, but like even in the sample of games that he did get into, which he could have been injured in part of those as well, he didn't jump up a whole lot, which is a bad sign to begin with. Like if you're like a really, really young player and you don't see that jump, then it's like, okay, not as concerning. You still have a lot more runway to work with. But with a guy like McQueen, who is one of the older players in the draft, like he's October 2nd, I believe. So, I mean, he's basically like 2 weeks from being the absolute oldest that you can be in the draft, and he doesn't make that big jump in his draft year. That's a big concern for me. And you look at players who sort of look the same way. Like Brady Tkachuk is the big outlier who did this as well, and he was one of the older prospects, and then he's worked out, really well for the Senators. But most of the time, when a player does that, it's not good news, and they, especially if they're drafted high, they might make the NHL, but they don't work out to what the team essentially envisioned. I mean, actually, Kirby Dach is a really good example of this. He was drafted third overall, obviously, by the Blackhawks. He looked exactly like this. He had the older birthday. He's a bigger guy, didn't make that massive jump in his draft year. And, now he's bounced around. He's in Montreal. Like, if he did a redraft now, like, he probably wouldn't be taken in the top 10 for that 2019 draft. So that's kind of the concern with McQueen. And then the other thing, too, is he's like, he's big. He's not just big, like he's gigantic. Like he's 6'5", like he's much bigger than basically anybody he plays against. So, you know, is he getting even like a little bit of a jump because he's so much bigger than anybody and he can just kind of body his way to the net? Whereas when you make the NHL, that sort of goes away. Everybody's the same size. They can play big against him, and he can't create room like he maybe has because he's so big. So you add all that up, and like, this guy's kind of talked about as like a top five, certainly a top 10 pick, but like, yeah, that raises a lot of concerns for me, and that's why I have him kind of ranked around that 18th hole because when you look back at 35 years worth of history, like these guys don't tend to work out as, these big power forward stars. Like, a lot of them make the NHL, but they don't turn into more than like a 40-point guy in the NHL, right? So that's why I have him ranked quite a bit lower than consensus, I would say.
And I believe in the 2019 draft, Kirby Doc was absolutely taken way before he should have. I mean, I was shocked as a Blackhawks fan. That was kind of, it wasn't a Beckett Seneca type shock because we knew a little bit that he could be the pick, but obviously injuries crippled his year. And I mean, for the past couple of years with the Habs, but I mean, he was traded for somebody named like Frank Nazar. And can you tell me about like how somebody like Frank Nazar and like James Hagens kind of match up together? Because they aren't the same prospect profile, but they kind of have similar deficiencies. Obviously, Nazar is kind of he has excelled in his NHL time to a point where you can with the Blackhawks, but do you see James Hagens being kind of similar with him coming in or needing a couple years and then him coming into the NHL?
Yeah, so I mean, they're both kind of on the smaller variety, smaller centers that can kind of produce. Um, they do look somewhat similar in the model. So Hagen's actually had this really great profile in his pre-draft year where he had this sky high equivalency. And normally when you see that, like having an equivalency essentially over the 40s in your pre-draft year, you go on to your draft year and you have something in the 50s. And these are what I call these sort of, near certain superstars. A lot of these guys are generational guys. So Connor Bedard looked exactly like this, McDavid, Crosby, Jack Eichel, Austin Matthews, all these guys, right? And Hagens was sort of on that trajectory, but then this year he started off pretty well. He was doing okay producing in college, and then right around Christmas time, sort of fell off, and he ended up with actually an equivalency lower than what he had last year. And that is like a big, well, a pretty big red flag for me because the ones that keep on going and they have this big jump in their draft year, like they basically always turn into a star, like a point per game superstar in the NHL. And the ones that don't, they end up pretty good players, but they don't reach that like top echelon. And so, yeah, so he kind of had that going on. And then you look at a guy like Nazar too, and he sort of looks similar, where he had like an equivalency in the 30s in his pre-draft year, which is really, really good. And then he didn't really jump out of that. He kind of stayed in that same exact equivalency in his actual draft year. So you kind of have a little bit of similarity there. Now, it's taken Nazar a couple of years and he's certainly starting to find his game and looks like he could be a decent like 2, 3C for Chicago. So there are a bit of similarities there. I think Hagens has like a little bit more upside. I think he's certainly going to go back to college for at least a year and hopefully really dominate, get all the power play time and show that, he should have been a first overall pick. But yeah, that little bit of a drop off is kind of universally taken him out of like first overall contention and put him more around that four slot. So yeah, curious to see where Hagens goes and what happens with his development, but I could certainly see it like something similar to Nazar where he needs a couple years before, he's really ready for NHL action.
And it's surprising to see there's four players under 6 feet in the top 12. And I mean, I think that there certainly could be based on talent. Kendall and Reggie kind of have more of skating issues, but I mean they could always get better. But at being under 6 feet, does that like scare you that they do have those skating issues, but they obviously are both players that excelled in Reggie for sure in the international tournaments, but they're just incredible point producers in the dub.
It scares me a little bit because normally with those small guys, you like them to be, some of the fastest kids on the ice. Not always, but you like it to be there. But I mean, they're not that small that it like really concerns me. Like 5'10" is kind of on the brink of maybe you're getting to too short category, but like it's not like they're like 5'7", 5'8". That's where it would be really concerning. Like, like a guy like DeBrincat sort of looked similar. He was a bit older, had a little bit more higher equivalency in his pre-draft year and his draft year, but kind of looks similar. And he's, 5'9" or whatever. And the thing with him was he was docked and he was taken in the second round because he wasn't the fastest. He didn't have that Datsuk, speed in a phone booth type thing where he can deke around you. And he didn't have like breakneck, you know, um, like north-south speed. Like he didn't have that like super fast out of the gate speed. So that's why he kind of got docked down. And I mean, he's worked out really, really well, obviously, to bring cat. So I could see kind of a similar thing with Reshny and Kindle where, they're missing that one part and they're missing the height. But if they're 3 inches taller, like they'd both be top 10 picks and then they both work out pretty good. And, you look back 5 years down the road and they both worked out much better than where they were drafted, essentially.
And in the model, who's your comparison for Matthew Schaeffer, or what do the numbers say for Matthew Schaeffer?
So Schaefer is very interesting because, you look at the eye test, you look at, scouting reports, like everything is like phenomenal about him. And, watching him just even in his brief stint in the World Juniors and stuff, like he's a big guy, he can defend, but he can also like fly and like push out of the zone if he needs to and basically create the play on his own. So he has all that going for him. And the only thing like model wise is he has a really small sample. He only played 17 games before he got injured. And the injury is, I think he broke his collarbone. So like not is a freak thing. It's not like a recurring thing probably that's going to hamper him. So, that kind of, paints him in another favorable light. Obviously, he's a consensus number one. But when you look at him in the model, there's a couple things about him. So he's big, like I said. Um, Really, really good production in his draft year. He only played 17 games, but his equivalency was sky high. It was 31 or 32 or something. And if you look at every defenseman drafted essentially since 1990, but probably going back ever, and you look at the really young ones, so basically born from May until September 15th, he has the highest equivalency of all of them, which is a really good sign. I mean, that's a pretty good sign that you have this stud offensive defenseman. Um, and then you factor in like, the scouting reports and what people say about him, and he has kind of everything to him. So I mean, I've kind of likened it to like worst case scenario, you get like Jay Bomeister, like he can
Mm.
easily play 25 minutes a night for 20 years and help to shut down the offense. You'll get a little bit of offense from him, maybe, you know, 30 to 40 points type thing. Like that's kind of worst case scenario I can see. And then like best case scenario is you're kind of getting like a Victor Hedman type where he can kind of do everything, but also put up 50 to 60 points a year and, be an obvious number one in this league. So yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be really good. Profiles really well in the model, has a lot to like about him. It's just basically that sample size where you'd like to see that even 30, 40 games to be more sure about it. But other than that, he looks phenomenal.
And then somebody that could be the number one pick if obviously a team like the Blackhawks were picking number one, Michael Misa. Can you tell me about who his player comps were in the model, as well as, I mean, he was break. I mean, he put up point totals that haven't been reached since Tavares and Kane, and obviously, I mean, the guy was probably the number one pick for the last 4 years in this class. Even teams wanted Luke Misa just to get some intel. I know you guys got him, but can you
Yeah.
just tell me about Michael Misa a little bit?
Yeah, so really great profile in the model. Very rare profile. He went from an equivalency in the 20s in his pre-draft year, which is obviously very good for, a 17-year-old and they're not even in their draft year. And then he shot up to something north of 50 this year playing in the OHL, like you said, like putting up kind of record numbers in the OHL. Very rare to jump up that much to this sort of extraordinary degree. So you look at players that kind of profiled like that. Marco Rossi is kind of similar. Obviously, Michael Misa is much bigger than Marco Rossi and does it in a different way, but kind of looks similar. Adam Fantilli looked very similar. Marian Hossa, Will Smith, who's with the Sharks right now, he looked very similar. Even a guy like Eric Lindros looked pretty similar. He had a bit of a better draft year, but I mean, you put him in that company and like he looks really good. So I mean, I have him at third right now just because again, Frondell sort of bubbled up to the top and the consensus is so high on Schaeffer. But I mean, getting this guy at third overall, if that's where the Blackhawks get him, like massive value. Like to get a player like that is often, a first overall pick type talent, and he could be available at third. So that's huge for a team like the Hawks for sure.
Yeah, before we get to Desnoyers and Martone, I just want to know, like, obviously there's going to be teardrops in every single class, but a lot of people have been kind of saying before they got into the whole draft mania that this draft was weaker and it wasn't as much depth. Can you dispel those rumors or do you agree with them?
No, I like looking at it from like a pure data perspective. So you're basically looking at these really high probability players that you know, like an 80% chance of turning into a star plus or whatever. And then you're kind of looking at the next level and the next level down. And then you kind of have this, normally you have this big group of sort of above average producers where, like 40, 50% of them make the NHL. They don't turn into stars a lot, but like you have this big group to work with. And certainly looking at the data this year, like the size of each of those groups and then comparing it to other years, it's a lot smaller. So even looking back to, 2023 was a really deep draft. 2019 was very deep. 2020 was very deep. You look and you compare just like the frequency counts of these different groups, and this one's a lot smaller. Not and even another part like um, often there's a number of overagers which look pretty favorable in the model and they've had a big jump. Like this year, there's not many of those either. So yeah, I'd say it's certainly a weaker class. At the top end, you have some nice players, but it drops off pretty fast, and it seems a lot weaker than some of these really nice drafts we've had over the last 5, 10 years type thing.
Yeah, 2023 was just absolutely loaded with the with who was in that class. Can you tell me about like where the drop off is in your eyes in the first round?
So for
Like just
me, in terms
yeah.
of my 32, like I would say that there's a ledge at obviously at three at Misa, and then it kind of drops off again, and then there's a ledge probably at around seventh at Martone, and then there's another ledge till 11, and then like picks 12 through roughly 23 in my top 32 is sort of one relatively big similar group, and then there's another ledge from 24th, and then it's kind of like a steep drop from there, and then it really falls off after that 32. So there's a couple different ledges, probably three or four sort of ledges in terms of how the prospects look in the model and their probabilities.
And can you tell me about Desnoyers and Martone? First, Desnoyers, because obviously he had some of the highest faceoff percentages in the entire class, but didn't really play a lot of center after his wrist injuries, basically back in November, December. And then he might have re-aggravated the injury in the Memorial Cup based on things we've heard. But is Desnoyers one of those players that has that star potential? Like, what is his star probability in your model?
Yeah, I think he certainly does. He looks very similar to a guy like Jake O'Brien. They're both centers, both big, both relatively young. So I think his star probability is probably right now is probably around 50 or 60%. You look at players that he looks like, I mean, obviously a very different player, but Nathan McKinnon looked like this when he was drafted. He was very young. Like he was 15 days away from being eligible for the next year. So he's a little bit older than that, but like Matt Barzal looked this way. Matt Boldy looked very similar. He's not a center, but very similar size, kind of maybe even a little bit underrated, where, he was drafted 12th overall and now he's kind of burgeoning on being a superstar for Minnesota. So lots of players look like that, that make big jumps. And yeah, like you said, he's played center, but maybe he doesn't stick there. Maybe that's not pivotal, but like the sort of the rumors about him, it just keeps on growing and growing. It kind of started off like, oh, this guy could be like a top 10 pick, like, a few months ago. And now, like, I'm seeing stuff that this guy might go third or fourth. So, yeah, I mean, he looks great in the model. I mean, no real red flags there. I have one spot behind O'Brien just because O'Brien's a few months younger than him, but like, could kind of go either way and O'Brien's a right shot, which is sort of a rarer feature in the NHL. But like, yeah, could go either way there. So he looks really good to me, and I think a team is, depending on where he goes, like especially if he kind of drops out of the top five, like I think a team is going to be pretty surprised with the type of talent that they get at that spot. So
Yep. Obviously, the Flyers have his brother Elliott in the AHL level, so Dan Nourier probably doesn't get past six if Jake O'Brien goes before him. But yeah, they're very similar players. Obviously, right-handed centers and right-handed defensemen are definitely coveted in the NHL. It's just kind of harder to get. But Porter Martone and his skating, a lot of people have said that his skating looks bad or first three strides, he was an awful skater. But when I was talking to Chris Peters at the Combine, he said that like 4 years ago, this guy could not really I mean, he was not even close to a NCAA NHL skater. Like now, his skating has gone so far. So, can you tell me about Porter Martone's game?
yeah, so I mean, model wise, like looks really good as well. He's big, obviously, he's 6'3", he's older, which matters, but it doesn't matter if you're essentially putting up the production where sort of that ledge kind of goes away, which he's doing. I mean, he had an equivalency, I think, in the 20s in his pre-draft year and then in the 40s, I believe, this year. So, I mean, you look at players that look like that, they, especially that size, they basically always make the NHL. So at least you have a formidable NHLer that you can use. He's big, so I mean, you can basically use him wherever, but pretty likely he's going to be, a top six guy. You look at guys that look just like that. Svechnikov looked basically identical. Going back, you have like Keith Primo, Owen Nolan, Damon Lankow. Um, and then more recent guys like Cole Perfetti, who's a bit smaller, looked very similar. So, I think about 60% of the time, like these guys turn into stars in the NHL. And then, basically, like I said, you're for sure getting a 200 plus game NHLer out of the deal. So yeah, I think he looks really good. Not many, problems with him. Yeah, like the skating, like if he was, you know, like a really, really powerful skater, almost like a Quentin Byfield type skater with that size, like I think his production would have even gone up, his profile in the model would have gone up, and then he would be kind of like a consensus top three pick, maybe top two pick. So maybe that sort of bring him back a little bit. But I mean, yeah, he looks like a heck of a player, and you're certainly getting an NHLer there, and probably like a pretty good one, a star or a fringe star, something like that.
And the last question for the 2025 NHL draft rankings, because I do have some questions about the 2024 real quick. But Anton Frondell and Victor Eklund playing in the SHL, even in the playoffs. I mean, their minutes were sparse. And I mean, I think Anton Frondell scored a goal in a game he played like under a minute. Does that kind of affect the scoring? I mean, he's your number one player, so obviously it didn't affect him with his playing time in the playoffs. But do you think that Anton Frondell and Victor Eklund kind of get a knock down or up based on their interesting minutes in the playoffs?
I mean, it doesn't really impact me. I basically just take their regular season numbers because, yeah, in the playoffs, you always kind of have that juking around, especially with the younger guys playing in pro Euro leagues. Like they're gonna get benched and they're gonna get sat. And if you get up by a goal, you don't want to get them on the ice and give up the goal, and then you don't have the confidence in them, so they get treated very differently. So it doesn't really impact me and my mom. I don't even really look at it because sometimes they play 4 games, sometimes they play 12 games, 16 games, whatever it is. Like it's kind of all over the map. It's like like a World Juniors tournament as well. Like sometimes you have a rough couple games and it just doesn't work out. That's why, the model is kind of like looking at the aggregate. It's looking over the whole regular season. So, where you get that good sample of games. So yeah, it doesn't really factor in the playoffs. I'm not too worried about it. I think both of them have a very high reputation. I don't know if their playoffs have hampered them or boosted their stock. It's tough to tell. I mean, I think they're kind of right where they were kind of talked about a few months ago. So yeah, it doesn't really impact in terms of my model, but yeah.
So were Cole Rejny's playoff numbers in the model?
No, just his
Wow.
regular season, which were also, yeah, like that was like he was heating up before he got to the playoffs, and then the playoffs he was on another level too. So yeah, no, I don't, again, like across the board, like I don't consider any of the playoff numbers. I think the only exception to that is the NCAA. They sort of mix the numbers. So when I'm looking them up and calculating everything, everything's sort of already cooked together, whereas everything's always separated with everything else. Because in the NCAA, you might play one game, you might play, 8 games or whatever it is. So yeah, but everywhere else, the playoff numbers are always kind of outside of it.
Well, I wanted to touch on Resny because obviously he's number 11 on your board and he played six incredible games going into the playoffs. So then he was just a man putting up Gavin McKenna type numbers. So that is impressive that he's already 11. So I'm going to stop sharing this. That's his rankings. I'm going to link them down below as well as everything he does. But just for the 2024 draft, I have a couple quick questions. Artem Levshunov and Ivan Demidov. I know the Blackhawks obviously took Artem Levshunov. Do you think that that was a mistake, and or do you think that you had Ivan Demidov just so much better in your model?
Well, yeah, I mean, the big thing with those two is, I guess, the position. So, I mean, Levshunov profiled very well. Like he profiled, he had crazy numbers in the NCAA and nice numbers in his pre-draft year. Like kind of looked similar to a guy like Hedman. Like he profiled very similar. Didn't jump up as much this year playing in the NHL that I thought he might. So I'm not down on him yet, but like if he has like a second consecutive year like that, then it might be like, oh, now we might be looking at something. But I was pretty high on him. Like I think I had Parekh ahead of him, but I certainly had him in the top five. I think I had him fourth or something. But Demidov, I mean, plays a different role, but in terms of a forward, so Bedard needs people to play with. He needs
Yeah.
really good players to play with if you're going to get anywhere. So Bedard has this profile where these guys that I'm talking about, these guys that always work out into point per game plus superstars. And you look like at a guy like Demidov, look the exact same way as Bedard. So he coming from a different league, but again, you normalize all these numbers and you put them all on the same level playing field. He has almost the exact same profile as Bedard. And then he went to the KHL this year and just basically boosted his stock, which was already sky high with me. So I think they might have missed out on like a 90-point guy with Demidov, which is a bit of a sting, especially if he was playing with Bedard. Like that'd just be like just a monster line. But with Levshunov, like you should have a star defenseman and a big giant mobile guy that can play tons of minutes. So hopefully he's still a piece that Chicago needs and he works out to something really nice for him. But yeah, I mean, the way that Demidov looked in the model and then the way he came in this year, and then even though the little brief stint he had with Montreal, obviously didn't play enough to count in the model or anything, but it's like, oh man, like that guy looks like he's going to be pretty insane. So, yeah, it's TBD on that, but I didn't hate the pick at second, but like I was very very high on Demidov like the whole year. So, yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah, that first game where he played the Chicago Blackhawks, we were not happy as a as a fan
Yeah,
base.
yeah. That was a good game. That was fun. Like
Yeah,
just pure
not for me.
electricity every time he got on the ice. Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
I what was it, second or third shift he scored? I turned it off, and then or no, he assisted with that beautiful assist, and then
Yeah.
I turned it off for a little bit, went back in, saw the goal. I was like, I gotta turn this off. Like
That's it. Yeah,
there's
I
just no
gotta
way.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. So it's yeah.
Calgary. Oh, go ahead.
No, no. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just still thinking of Demidov. I gotta stop talking about him. Everyone in my family says it's bad for my health. But Calgary Flames have the 18th overall pick. Who is somebody that you would love for them to take because you're a Calgary guy?
Um, so I think there will be two guys, and I think one of them at least will fall to them, and that's Kindle and Reshny. So I think Reshny might go a little bit before Kindle. Kind of sounds like he should be around that mark. So I'm hoping one of those two fall to them and they grab that. I mean, Kindle's a hitman too, so he's a Calgary product, so they would have eyes on him every week. So they got a good, a good scouting report on that guy. But yeah, that's who I'm hoping that they get at that slot.
I love this kid. I got a 20-minute sit down with him at the combine. He is just very down to earth. I mean, the kid can drink his water. I think he had two glasses. I had to slow him down. I was like, slow down. No, but he's
Had to take a
great.
pee break halfway through.
Yeah, yeah. That's hilarious. I but yeah, he's a good person. I really think that it would be awesome for him to stay in Calgary. I think it's just home for him at this point, and the guy can absolutely snipe and his playmaking ability is awesome, even with the skating moves. I think that he can easily get those handled out. In some cards, I saw 4.5 skating, and I just kind of disagreed. But this is your Hot Ones time. There's cameras here, here, and here. Tell everybody where they can find you, what you're working on, and anything else you want to plug.
Yeah, so the site's hockeyprospecting.com. All the stuff we've been talking about, all the cards that I post on Twitter and stuff are all on there. It's a annual subscription. I think it's like $40 Canadian a year. So whatever that works out to US, a lot cheaper than that. So that's where you can find everything. And like everything I post on Twitter, basically, like it's just one subscription. You get access to all of it. And then on Twitter, I'm at Byron M. Bader on Twitter, and I'll be, posting all over the draft days. I'll be on there. I'm sure you'll see some of my stuff popping up. Yeah, and yeah, hit me with any questions or feedback. Things that you want to maybe see in the site or the model or whatever. And yeah, sometimes especially if I get multiple requests for the same thing, then it's like, okay, that's something I should look at and add it in there. But yeah, that's where you can find me. And yeah, hit me with any questions or feedback.
Thank you so much for coming on. This was absolutely awesome.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on. That was fun.